Hey YouTube, I'm Coach Dragonmar and welcome to a new video. After solo queuing to Radiant in episode 1, my goal is to help you guys do the same. If you enjoy these videos, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you're interested in coaching, check out my coaching profile at the Metafy link in the description below. 100% of what I earn from coaching is going toward helping me pay for my wedding in November. For a limited time, use code Dragonmar-Spring20 for 20% off coaching. And thank you to everyone who has already signed up. And guys, before I forget, I have two announcements. First and foremost, I have another Twitter giveaway. If you guys want the new bundle, please enter. Super easy to do and free to enter. And I'm returning to streaming on Twitch. This is a big announcement. I'm really excited to get back into streaming. I will be starting my stream up on Saturday, June 4th. That is my first stream. We're gonna be going live around noon. I hope to see you there. I'm gonna be doing a lot of good stuff, coaching, VOD reviews, and I'm starting a new series. You guys are not gonna wanna miss it. So I hope I see you there on Saturday. In today's video, we'll be discussing the secrets to consistency and what I believe are some of the fatal flaws and assumptions a lot of players are making about why they're inconsistent. This video is going to cover a few topics, and because I strongly believe that to solve a problem, we must first understand it, we're going to begin by explaining why consistency is so hard. I'm going to lay out a lot of the reasons that you're struggling to be consistent. Some you'll know, some you probably won't, and then I will cover what I believe are the secrets to consistency, things that are often overlooked or just not talked about enough, and then we'll finish it off by explaining what are some of these mistakes people are making, why they're making them, and why the mindset they have is actually hurting them in the long run to being less consistent, or actually making them be less consistent, I should say. There's a lot to cover, so let's begin. And guys, jumping into why consistency is so hard, why you're not consistent in your games, we must first talk about variables, okay? The reason you're inconsistent is because of the changing variables from game to game, right? Let's talk about what those are. First and foremost, the simple one, right? Your team or the enemy team are changing pretty much every game. Especially if you solo queue like me, you're often going game after game after game with 9 other people you've never played with before. That is impacting your ability to be consistent. The reason, every player has their own playstyle. They have their own habits. They make good plays, they make bad plays, but for the most part, everyone is relatively unique. Doesn't mean they're not going to have similar roles, but in certain situations, they're going to be making different decisions. That, my friends, is a changing variable from game to game because you do not know exactly what the other team is thinking or doing. Now, next thing, team compositions, what agents you're playing in these games. Not just you and your agent selection, but the agents on your team and the enemy team. One game you might be playing a very meta standard comp. You might find a Viper on one team, maybe there's a Breach, you know, maybe they have a Jet or something of that nature, and they've kind of got all their bases covered. They might also have a Chamber most likely in this meta. And then the next game, you might be playing against 4 duelists, or your team might have 4 duelists, right? These are changing variables. These variables are stopping you from being able to just do the same thing over and over and over and really get a hang of things, right? You want to talk about being inconsistent. Well, how can you be consistent if everything around you is changing? We'll get into that soon. But also think about the maps, right? There is now 7 maps in the competitive pool for ranked. 7 maps, guys. A lot of people aren't even playing 7 games in a day. This means most times, most play sessions, players are not even playing the same map twice in a lot of situations. You might play one map like 3 times in a row, and then you won't play one map for like a week, right? I mean, you know, that might be an exaggeration, but maps are changing as well, right? So go from game to game to game, you never really get to iron out on that one map. This isn't Counter-Strike where you can just select which map you play and really grind it out. You're at the mercy of RNG for the most part. On top of that, we also have the strategies, right? The way that your team is choosing to run rounds, or the way the enemy team is choosing to run rounds. The other team might be very aggressive, very focused on early pressure. The next game, you might be playing a team that just wants to default the whole times. These are changing variables. And the final thing I want to cover is teamwork and communication. One game, you guys know this. You play a game, your team has perfect comms. Everyone is working together, everyone's talking, things feel great. The next game, quiet. Dead. No one's saying a word. You're doing poorly. You're losing. And trust me, that's never a fun feeling. All of the variables that I just described are occurring in every single game you play and changing every game you play. This is the absolute truth, unless you're like 5 stacking, and then I guess your team doesn't change. So What we need to figure out is how to work around these changing variables to bring out the most consistency within us as possible. And I have a few ways to do that. The secrets to consistency. You know, probably one of the most clickbaity titles I've ever done on my channel, but it is the truth, I believe. These are often overlooked, under talked about, and a lot of people don't even really understand this concept fully. A lot of people look at consistency and just immediately think of aim training, which is kind of funny and also kind of sad about the state of Valorant with how much sort of focus there is on aim training rather than developing game sense. Whatever. Come to a coaching session, we'll talk about that more. But the secrets to consistency, let's cut to the chase here, no clickbait. First, foremost, limiting variability. Finding ways to limit the amount of variables that are changing from game to game that you have control over. Remember, the only constant in every game you play is you as a player, okay? It's not you as an agent, it's not the agent you play, the position, the role, the whatever. It's you as a player and the choices you make. So that's the first one. The second is mastering a role. Mastering a role is really one of those things that doesn't get talked enough about when it comes to consistency in particular, right? There's a lot of focus on aim training, aim lab, Kovacs, deathmatch grinds, practice range training, warm-up routine, times 1,000, best radiant, whatever, you know what I mean? There's not enough focus on the more game sense oriented side of the game, on the big brain plays, on the smart roles and the positioning you can play, and mini map awareness. And this is the focus of the video. I'm going to be explaining these two concepts about limiting variability and mastering your role, and how these are going to lead to a more consistent play. And then I'll also be explaining some of the mistakes and flaws that a lot of people are making and these bad assumptions that are leading you guys to really struggle with your consistency. First and foremost, let's talk about mastering a playstyle / role and why this is so good for consistency. So the reason I love this is because when you master a role, that role for the most part from game to game is going to be the same. You are always going to be playing your role in relatively the same way. You're going to kind of pair it up to the agent you're playing and maybe differ it a little bit depending on the team comp and where your team needs are. But that role, which has a certain grouping of agents within it, is your playstyle, right? That's where you develop your playstyle as a player. And as long as you stay in that role, you start to develop what I like to call a bank or like a library of knowledge. That knowledge is incredibly important because what it does is it means that as long as you're playing that role, you have all of these experiences and all of these memories of things that have happened in the past. For example, if you are playing the role of an Omen, you probably understand over time how to time your smokes better, what to do in a certain situation or in a certain push because you've seen that push before, right? This is the key here, is I'm not talking about your aim. I'm talking about your game sense. I'm talking about your map knowledge. And I'm specifically talking about that within a specific role, because the more you play that role, the more game sense you have attached to that specific role, the more understanding you have of that role itself, and the better developed your play style within that role is. This is why my recommendation, if you're looking to be consistent, is to stick to a particular role or a particular set of agents that all require the same type of playstyle / play within the role. That is one of the biggest weaknesses that I see in the students I help and in the general Valorant community, is there's a lot of bouncing around between agents, right? If you can stick to a particular agent pool within a particular role, you start building the necessary knowledge to master that role and to be able to compensate for any type of situation you're in. Think about what I've already talked about. Your team, the enemy team comps, maps, strats, teamwork, communication. If you're within the same role though every game, a lot of those things become a lot easier because you have been in all of those situations before and you know how to play around them. That, my friends, is how you build consistency. Now, talking about mastering and playing a role is important, but I also want to talk about positioning in particular. The positions you play are very important in terms of determining your consistency and helping you with your consistency. I find that the most inconsistent players are those who are constantly bouncing around all over the place in different positions from map to game, even within the same map. Now, there's nothing wrong with switching up the spots you're playing in, but there is something wrong if you haven't developed a playstyle yet for a particular position and then you go to that position without really any knowledge of how to play there. Again, These are all things that are corrected to some degree by staying within a particular role. Again, because no matter where you are in the map, your role and your agent really are only going to be doing relatively the same things. And the more you play them, the more you build up that knowledge, so that now, you can go to any site in the game, any position in the game, and you'll know exactly what to do there because you've experienced it before. Or a new situation will occur where you'll have the necessary knowledge from previous situations to be able to determine the best possible scenario and the best course of action for that situation that just presented itself. This is a big problem for players who often feel lost in their games, right? The reason they feel lost is because they haven't been presented with that situation before and they don't know how to react to it. But when you master your role, when you play a certain agent selection and a role in particular long enough, you start to get that level of mastery and of knowledge to be able to adapt to new situations without feeling lost anymore, which is a massive problem. And a lot of that is coming down to your positioning, and having consistent positions in games leads to more consistent outcomes in those games. Now, we talked a lot about mastering the role, and within mastering the role, right, a lot of that is about limiting variability, right? If you play the same agent, boom, that variable's out the window. If you play the same positions, boom, out the window. But equally important are things like making sure you're consistently communicating in your games. Always be a voice in your games. Always be making callouts. If possible, call strats. Again, remember what I was saying earlier about how the strategies of your and the enemy team are constantly changing from game to game? Not if you're the shot caller. If you're the shot caller, you have a lot more control over that, which is why it's such a great role to take. But I do want to talk about aim training. I think it is important to have an aim training routine / warm-up for the majority of players. I think what's really important about this to understand is that this can't be your only focus. And I would be making a huge mistake in this video if I didn't at least talk about this, even if I don't think it's quite as important as limiting variability. I still think it's very important because you need to develop your aim pretty much no matter what rank you're in. And having a nice warm-up routine in particular is very nice, because what I find is when I do a warm-up, I'm always performing better in my first game, or at least I feel better to take a fight. Generally speaking, for me, it takes a few fights in that game for me to really get my bearings and get where I want to be. So a little bit of a warm-up is always a good thing, and you'll never hear me say otherwise. I'm never going to tell you guys that warming up is bad or having an aim routine won't lead to more consistency. I think it will. I just think that there are bigger fish to fry and more important things that you should focus on. Now that we've covered the secrets to consistency, which again are limiting variability and mastering a role, I want to talk about the mistakes, the big mistakes, and the fatal assumptions and flaws that people have when it comes to consistency, and maybe the misconceptions as well. First and foremost, I want to talk about players who constantly change settings. I know I'm calling a lot of you out. The reason I want to talk about this is that while your settings are important, they are very rarely the reason you're actually inconsistent. One of the big problems with this is that many people will look at their settings as the source of their inconsistency rather than their lack of game knowledge, or even perhaps sometimes their inconsistency with maybe their aim or something of that nature as well, a mechanical problem. So what I want to say is do not get hung up on changing your sensitivity, changing your crosshair, or changing your res or different, graphical settings. Very rarely is that actually what's holding you back. Generally speaking, it's because you're not doing the things I've already talked about in this video. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is, again, an over-reliance on aim. I think this is a common misconception when it comes to consistency. A lot of people think, okay, I'm not getting enough kills, I'm inconsistent. No, that's not really important. What you actually want to do is you want to reframe your mind. You want to move in with a new mindset. That mindset is to focus on value or focus on impact in your games instead as a measure of consistency. The value you provide in a round is far more than just the amount of kills. It's oftentimes based on your ability usage. Surprise, surprise. Which a lot of times will come from good positioning. Again, game sense. This is not aim. And that's why it's so important to understand. Get out of the mindset that consistency is just aim. It's not. It's so much more than that. So by reshaping that mindset and moving over to one that focuses more on your impact in a round, which can come from way more things than just kills, you're going to have a lot better time at addressing and developing why you're inconsistent. And then finally, guys, I just want to go over a very simple one, but it's playing too many agents. I think that this is a big problem with players who are really still trying to find their playstyle and trying to sort of get to that next step where they've always wanted to be, and they just feel so close. But when you guys play a ton of agents, especially agents in different roles, if your composition, when I look at your match history, if I see like Reyna, Killjoy, Brimstone, Fade, you know, I'm like, oh gosh, like you really don't have a particular role. And again, playing flex is important, right? Teams could use flex players, but mastering a certain role is just very important for consistency. And while I think it is important to flex, just remember, if you guys are flexing like every role in the game, you're slowing down that growth, okay? You're slowing down your growth. You're not completely inhibiting it, you're not stopping it fully, but you absolutely are delaying the progress, rather than if you focus in on maybe 1 or 2 roles, or in my suggestion, just 1 role in particular, which of course can still have multiple agents, even sometimes agents from other roles if you play it similarly enough. Alright guys, that wraps up our video on the secrets to consistency. Remember, those 2 secrets of course are limiting variability and mastering a role. I cannot stress enough how important these concepts are for you to understand, and not just that, but for you to learn from. They're going to be very important for you moving forward. Remember, stop making those mistakes I was talking about as well. Stop being so reliant on your aim. Stop changing your settings every game, and make sure you're not playing too many agents, because that can lead to poor consistency as well. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something new. If you did, hit that subscribe button, and I hope to see you again soon. Take it easy, and peace.